I will not send another generation of Americans to war in Afghanistan with no reasonable expectation of achieving a different outcome.
President Biden standing his ground on pulling U.S. troops out of Afghanistan as the Taliban make dramatic advances across that country. And we're back now with the panel. Marc, President Biden is ordering this pullout, but President Trump, former President Trump, was planning to do the same thing if he were reelected. And in fact, he had wanted to get all troops out by May 1st. As you look at what's happening in Afghanistan now, any second thoughts about this policy of total withdrawal?
Well, Chris, I think that President Trump was right to initiate it, and I actually think that President Biden is correct to complete the withdrawal. I think that Americans, men and women in uniform, should not be police keepers across the globe, nor should we be involved in nation building. Having said that, I do know that at the end, the intelligence community came to the Trump administration and said, if we could at least keep a hub at a base there, because we've had so many effective counterterrorism covert operations with special forces, and that would not require 100,000 troops. It would require enough troops to fortify a base. And if you look at Afghanistan, strategically located between Iran and China, having that base to continue to do covert operations, I think, would be beneficial to America. So I support the withdrawal of the majority of the troops. I think it's the right policy that the Biden administration is completing. I think it's unfortunate, though, that the intelligence community was not successful in getting their wish to maintain some base of troops there to allow us to continue to do counterterrorism operations.
Do you have any reason to believe that President Trump would have kept a counterterrorism force there?
No, I don't think that at the time that their arguments made their way with President Trump either. I think he was anxious to withdraw all troops, and I think that that's unfortunate. I think it would have been better to have had a base for the intelligence community to continue to do covert operations.
Chuck, the President Biden was categorical this week that whatever happens in Afghanistan, ultimately it's their problem. Take a look.
It's up to the people of Afghanistan to decide on what government they want, not us to impose the government on them.
Chuck, the flaw in that reasoning, of course, and you heard it also from John Kirby, is the Afghan people may not get to decide their government because it maybe won't be the U.S. that imposes it on them. It'll be the Taliban.
The way they're going to decide who's the government in Afghanistan is probably through war. And that's on the way. And that's why in that very good report we heard from Kabul from Greg, so many people in that city were expressing fear about what's coming next. It's absolutely true that this would have been Donald Trump's problem too, or his policy too. But it's now happening on Joe Biden's watch. And it's happening in some haste, and I would say some unseemly haste. It's almost like a bug out rather than a phased withdrawal. And I think we all need to be concerned, in addition to the humanitarian impact this will have on Afghanistan itself, on the prestige and the perceived power of the United States. I think one reason the Taliban is being so aggressive is they are going to try to create the spectacle of humiliating defeat, similar to Vietnam in 1974-75 for the United States, not just to take back Afghanistan, but to create a spectacle in the world that the United States is a weakened empire and a paper tiger. And if that happens, and I hope it doesn't, it will be happening on Joe Biden's watch, and for better or worse, he will own it.
I want to turn to the other big foreign policy story this week, and that is the continued cyber attacks on the U.S. emanating from Russia. It got serious enough that President Biden spoke to Russian President Putin for an hour this week and then had this readout.
The United States expects when a ransomware operation is coming from his soil, we expect them to act if we give them enough information to act on who that is.
You said 3 weeks ago there wouldn't be consequences. Will there be, sir?
Yes.
Julie, the president keeps saying to Putin, don't do it, and then it happens again, and he repeats, don't do it. Do they have a plan here as to how to deal with it?
Yeah, you know, this feels very similar to the arguments that we were hearing from the Obama White House in the final months of that administration, where there was a similar message being delivered largely privately at that point because we were in the 2016 campaign. But the message was, we know you're doing this. We know this is emanating from Russia and you need to stop. And yet here we are several years later and this is still happening. So I think, no, you know, the U.S. has not figured out at this point how to get Russia to change its behavior or how to get Putin to crack down on some of these bad actors within his country. I do think that there is a pretty aggressive discussion happening within the administration right now. John Kirby alluded to this. A lot of this is going to be classified. A lot of this is going to be, the response is going to be carried out in ways that we're not always going to see or know publicly. But until we see a change in behavior emanating from Russia, I think the answer to this has to be that, no, there is not an effective plan at the moment.
Marc, there's a danger when you keep setting red lines, and the difference between what Obama was doing and what Biden was doing was Biden made those red lines very public at the summit in Geneva. There's a danger to setting red lines and then not enforcing them.
Sure, Chris. I think that previously the Obama administration often prosecuted cyber attacks like a DOJ investigation and a crime. One thing that's been, I think, less reported is President Trump gave a lot more latitude to our military and to our intelligence communities to respond in kind with cyber attacks and to be aggressive with it. And I think it deterred foreign actors who were looking to attack the United States. I don't know whether the Biden administration has relapsed to a previous policy that's pursuing it more as a criminal investigation, is whether they're giving the same latitude to our military with cyber attacks. But I do believe that we have an extreme capability to cripple other countries who conduct these attacks on us, and whether or not our military is given the latitude to use them, I don't know right now.
Chuck, I got about 30 seconds left. If these cyber attacks continue, and they continued after the warning in Geneva, now Putin's gotten another warning, if they continue, how much runway does Joe Biden have left before he has to act?
I think he's got less runway now than he had before, and I think Putin is loving this situation because this is a perfect way to harass the United States and cause a perception of weakness by the president with deniability for Moscow and no cost to Putin.
Well, and that, of course, is the question. At some point, will there be a cost to Putin? Panel, thank you. See you next Sunday.